Alright, welcome to Green Magic. This is the 10th and final video in the card draw series. This one is about artifact-based draw. Now, there have been a lot of artifacts in all of these videos. This one is mostly centered around artifacts that you have to tap it to draw a card. So, most of these, you have to pay mana and tap them to draw a card. If an artifact appeared on another video for another reason, it probably won't be on this one, but these ones are generally not going to be highly efficient. They are things that you would only want to do if you are in an artifact-centric deck, or if you have tap and untap shenanigans, and if you especially if you have a deck that really cares about like a Seedborn Muse, where you can untap your stuff each turn, and so you can tap these artifacts and draw on each player's turn, which would also mean that it would synergize very well with or against any player, any opponent that would have effects that prevent you from drawing more than one card per turn. The fact that you can kind of delay your draws and draw your normal one card during your draw phase, and then draw on each of your opponent's turns. It's a way for you to get around that that problem and still be able to get card advantage. So let's start with Arcane Encyclopedia. It's a 3-mana artifact. You pay 3 and tap it to draw a card. It is a better value than the next card, or not the next card, a little bit further down on this list. So when I first saw this card, having been more familiar with the original, it was just a strict upgrade, and it is. But it's still, even if you ignore the casting cost, you cast it early in the game, and you use it like 10 times after that. 3 mana per card is not a great value. It's only something that you're going to want to use if you are, again, artifact heavy, tap untap shenanigans, or if you just need to draw on each player's turn as opposed to just doing all your draw during your turn. Next is Bonder's Ornament. It is a 3-mana artifact. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. You can pay 4 and tap it. Each player who controls a permanent named Bonder's Ornament draws a card. Here's a card that I'm actually very excited about. It's coming out in the Commander 20, so it's already been spoiled and everything, but due to circumstances, it has not actually been shipped out yet. It's not available for purchase for a couple more weeks, I think. I actually was very excited to see this card. I don't care that it can tap for a mana of any color. Even if it just tapped for green, that would be fine for me and my purposes. But the fact that it is just it's a redundant effect. It's similar to what we just saw, which was 3 to cast, 3 to draw a card. This one's 1 more for the card draw. It can tap for mana when you don't need the card draw, so it just has that extra benefit, and that is a huge deal. But the downside, where each player who controls this permanent draws a card, I don't think you're going to see this card in any deck except for those precons. So since there's little to no risk of this ever showing up, if you're in an artifact deck with tap and untap synergies and everything, this is going to just go right in that package. Along with Endless Atlas. It's a 2-mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card. But you can only activate that ability if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. So this is a card that should really only go in monocolor decks or maybe 2-color decks, because otherwise you're not going to have 3 lands with the same name if you're in 3 or 4 or 5 colors. This one actually sees a lot of play, which kind of surprises me, because I wouldn't think that these types of cards would really draw a lot of people's attention. Because it's 2 to cast, 2 to draw, it is better than the Arcane Encyclopedia and the next card on this list. The downside's not even a downside if you're in a monocolor deck running mostly or all basics. Yeah, I like this card, but it's got to be in the right deck. And really, any like mono white red deck, maybe even black, would probably want this just because they might be a little bit more strained for card draw. In green, you wouldn't really need it for the most part unless you have the other things. Next is Jayemdae Tome. This is a 4 mana artifact. It costs 4 to tap it to draw a card. This is the original, the classic. It goes all the way back to alpha. It's not seeing a whole lot of play. When Arcane Encyclopedia came out, it was strictly better because it cost 1 less to cast and 1 less to activate. The Endless Atlas is even better because it's only 2 to cast and 2 to activate. But if you're going for this type of deck, an artifact deck with tap or whatever shenanigans, then these all go together as part of your card draw package. And again, they synergize very well with Seedborn Muse. If you're already looking, if you include Seedborn Muse in a deck and that is an important part of the deck, then you could consider these cards as part of your card draw package to combo with that. But for just general purposes, just by itself, in a vacuum, these are not great values. Next is Tower of Fortunes. It's 4 mana artifact. Pay 8 and tap it to draw 4 cards. This card I really like. This one I don't think needs quite the synergy with being an artifact deck or tap shenanigans or even Seedborn Muse. Just the fact that you can draw this one card will draw you so many at once is pretty valuable. Imagine if you had a deck with like 10 cards where you can tap them and draw 1 card each, and you get all of them on board, and you had the mana to pay for all of them. Those 10 cards will draw you 10 more. Imagine if you had 10 cards like Tower of Fortunes on board, and you had the mana to activate them. You tap them, you draw 40 cards. It's just the fact that a single card draws you multiple cards is a greater value than you probably would just instinctively assume, which is why I think this card is underplayed. It should probably see a lot more play, unless you are running the better card draw effects, and there are plenty in green, and other colors might have their own good effects too, but this is one that's recurable and just pretty good. It is mana intensive, so it's not going to do very much good until you get to the late game. But once you get to that point in the game, it's the thing that's going to refill your hand pretty effectively. And yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good card. Next is Urza's Blueprints. It's a 6 mana artifact with Echo. Echo is an old mechanic that basically says during your upkeep, the turn after it came under your control, you have to pay its casting cost again or sacrifice it. And then you can just tap it to draw a card. So here's one that I really like it. I think it should probably see more play, especially if you're using it correctly. Because worst case scenario, you cast it, you play it on your turn, you draw 1 card, and then someone blows it up. 6 mana to draw a card, not good, but if stuff is going to get blown up anyway, you're better to lose this than something else. Second worst case scenario is the following turn during your upkeep, you choose not to pay the Echo cost, but you tap it before you have to sacrifice it. So 6 mana, draw 2 cards. 3 mana per card, not a great value, but not terrible either. Or you do pay the Echo cost, and now you've paid 12 total mana. You've so far drawn 2, but every turn after that is just free value. Now, the fact that it costs 6 means that you're not going to get it out in the early game, so it's going to come out in the mid-game at the earliest. And how many turns after that is the game going to go? Especially, how many turns after that is the game going to go and this permanent still on the battlefield? I mean, if it goes for another 10 turns, 12 mana, draw 10 cards or something, pretty good value. But the main thing is if you have a way to untap it and get recurring value, or if you have just something that says whenever you activate an ability, you may copy it, or something like that. Needs the right combo, and it needs the right pieces to make this a good card. But I have it in a deck, and I like its place in that deck. Next is Otherworld Atlas. It's 4 mana. It's an artifact where you can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and you can tap it to make each player draw a card for each charge counter on it. Now, this one does not cost you any mana to draw the cards, but you don't get to draw the cards right away because you have to at least spend a turn putting a counter on it, and all of your opponents also get to draw. So, if you have proliferate effects, you can pump this up faster. If you have a way to just untap it infinitely, you can just make everybody draw 500 cards all at once and the game's a draw. Or you could pump it up a bunch, and if you have a way to stop yourself from drawing somehow, then you can mill out all your opponents and you just win. But generally, it's just going to be a card value engine for yourself that your opponents happen to benefit off of too. So most of the time, if you're considering playing this, it's probably going to be in a group hug deck. You probably don't want to include this in just a normal, I'm trying to win and I want card draw of some kind of deck. But it is good in artifact untap type deck or proliferate. Next is Temple Bell, 3 mana artifact. Tap it, each player draws a card. This one does see a lot of play, and I assume it's partially because of the it's a cheap card in mana. It's a cheap card in money. It doesn't require an activation cost. It can be used for political value, and it's definitely a good piece in a casual, low-powered, friendly game where you're not too concerned with winning. But it's not a powerful card unless you have a way to, on your turn, just abuse it to no end and win that turn like right away. For the most part, the symmetrical effect is not, you're probably not coming out too far ahead. So next is Well of Knowledge. It's a 3 mana artifact. Any player may pay 2 mana during his or her draw phase to draw a card. Players may use this ability as many times as they choose. So another symmetrical effect, a very group hug type thing, where you just give everyone the option to pay 2 mana as many times as they want but only during their draw step to draw as many cards as they want. So they would either, if they're flooded and just need a way to dump their mana, this is a mana sink that is card draw. It's not something that you're probably going to, unless you have a way to generate infinite mana. If you're going down that route where your deck is very much trying to generate infinite mana, you're not necessarily going to benefit off this greatly. So if you're really trying to win, if you're trying to power up your deck, don't include this card. If you're trying to keep a game very, very casual and middle of the road and like new player friendly and just help out, make it more of a team dynamic type thing, then it could be fun for that. But yeah, not something that's just like powerful. Next is Bag of Holding. It's a 1 mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. You can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. And then you can pay 4, tap it, sack it, return all cards exiled with it to their owner's hand. This is seeing a pretty good amount of play for a card that's, only came out in M20. I remember drafting it actually, and it was reasonably well. It did reasonably well in a limited format, just because you don't really have a lot of card draw and you run out of gas pretty fast. I don't know that this should see as much play as it does in Commander. If, for one thing, if you're just playing it like kind of honest and fair, the fact that you draw a card and discard a card means that you are getting card selection and card advantage, but you don't have extra cards because you're losing one. And the fact that you have to tap it for both abilities means that if it gets destroyed while it's tapped, or if you don't have mana to activate the second ability, then all those cards that were exiled under it just kind of go away. And if you happen to discard something that you maybe want later but don't have the mana for now, or you exile something that is maybe you don't really need it too much, but at least it's just something to use. Yeah, if this gets destroyed, you lose out on that value. So it's a card that doesn't really generate good card draw because you have to discard as well, and has a vulnerability. It's a big downside. Next is Bargaining Table. 5 mana artifact, pay X, tap it, draw a card. X is the number of cards in an opponent's hand. So this one, I don't use it, but it has a silliness to it that could be very appealing. If you were to compare it to some of the other ones earlier in the list, like Jayemdae Tome, which costs 4, Arcane Encyclopedia, which costs 3, Endless Atlas, which costs 2, this could cost, I mean, the casting cost is going to be at least 1 more than Jayemdae Tome, but the activation cost could be less than those. All you need is at least one of your opponents to not have very many cards in hand, which will often be the case by mid game. So this could be a cheap activation cost, but the fact that it's a variable means that if you don't like leaving things to chance, going before a game's ever started, just leaving things to chance in deck building, then you wouldn't want this card. But I would assume that the risk is relatively mild. It's usually you should have at least one opponent that's going to have 4 or less cards, so it'll be comparable to some of the other ones. Not efficient, but neither are the other ones. Next is Book of Rass. It's a 6 mana artifact. You pay 2 mana, and then you pay 2 life to draw a card. And then effects that prevent or redirect damage can't be used to counter this loss of life. That part you will never really care about. It doesn't tap, so you can do this as many times as you want, provided you have the mana and the life. So I know I have at least 1 copy of this card. I kind of feel like it probably belongs in some decks because it's just 2 mana to draw a card and then 2 life. But most people in Commander pay 2 life like it's nothing. Every time you shock a land, it's 2 life. Every time you fetch a land, it's 1 life. So paying life is not something that is too foreign to Commander players. It is an effect that I personally generally avoid, because I wouldn't want to pay 10 mana and 10 life to draw 5 cards. But at the same time, you could pay 10 mana and 10 life to draw 5 cards, and that's not the worst deal in the world either. So provided that you're generating good amounts of mana and your life total is comfortable, this is something that should probably be at least considered. Not a great card, but considered. It may work in your deck better than you expect. Next is Candles of Leng. It's a 2 mana artifact. Pay 4, tap it, reveal the top card of your library. If it has the same name as a card in your graveyard, put it into your graveyard. Otherwise, draw a card. So the condition isn't too relevant in Commander because aside from basic lands, it's not going to have the same name as a card in your graveyard. And unless you're doing things that are sacrificing basic lands, or maybe like a dredge deck, or like a Gitrog or something where you are sacrificing basic lands, they could be in there. But anything other than that, your opponents aren't gonna strip mine a basic. So you're pretty safe on the condition, but it is revealed, and that's the thing that's a huge downside. Otherwise, it's like 2 mana to cast, so it's half as much as Jayemdae Tome, and 4 to activate, which is the same, so you do save 2 on the casting. Or if you were to compare it to Endless Atlas, same casting, but costs twice as much to activate. So it's in the same league as those other card draw artifacts that are on this list, but the fact that you reveal it, and I very much don't like doing that. I don't like cards or effects, spells, or abilities that force me to reveal my hand to my opponents, because whatever you reveal, that's information that they can use. If you reveal a board wipe, they know not to play their creatures and attack you until you use it. If you reveal just a single target removal, or something that'll destroy their artifact or something, they know not, hey, I was about to play an artifact that you would definitely want to destroy. Now I won't. I'll wait for you to burn that on something else. If you reveal a counter spell, they'll know to look out for it. Revealing cards, I think, is if everybody's on top of their game and they have answers and stuff like that, then you put yourself in a pretty bad position. So if you don't mind, if you don't feel like your deck is very intimidating, or if you're actively if maybe in the past your decks have been overpowered and you're trying to tone it down and you're trying to make sure that other people don't target you, then revealing cards revealing bad cards or weak cards is very productive for establishing yourself as not a threat, and can kind of expedite the process of making your play group chill out. Next is Emmessi Tome. It's a 4 mana artifact. You pay 5, tap it, draw 2, then discard 1. I don't like discard generally. If I draw a ton of cards in one turn and have to discard a hand size, that I can be okay with that sometimes. Sometimes it feels bad, but to do it right out of the gate, especially suppose you have no cards in hand, this allows you to draw 2 and then you have to discard one of them. Maybe you need both cards. So I'm not a huge fan of that. But if you're doing madness, if you're doing graveyard stuff, if you don't mind kind of milling yourself, or if you just already have a good amount of cards in hand and you can easily afford to lose one, 5 mana to draw 2 is kind of on the good end of the other artifacts on this list. And it's because of that downside that it has. Next is Fool's Tome. It's 4 mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card. Use this ability only if you have no cards in your hand. So this is a deck if you are playing like 1 with nothing and you've purposely discarded all your cards. Maybe this would go in that deck. If you have some reason to, if you're playing like one of those discard type decks where you're forcing each player discards a card, each player discards a card, each opponent discards a card, like a black-centric heavy deck, with a black deck with that effect being a primary goal of your deck, then it would be expected for you to oftentimes have no cards in hand, and this would be a good card to refill your hand in those cases. But if you're just doing it because you think it's card draw and your experience has been you're always top decking, you need to fix your card draw, and this video series has hopefully helped you to the point where this card is actively bad. So if you want to play actively bad cards and go full jank, then this is something that you could include in a deck. But if you're actually serious about card draw, this should not be on your list. Next is an Illuminated Folio, 5 mana artifact. Pay 1, tap it, reveal 2 cards from your hand that share a color, and draw a card. like I've said just a minute ago, I don't generally like revealing what I have, whether it's the top card of my library or cards from my hand. With this one, I do have it in a deck, and I, for the most part, don't even care about the downside. If you're looking for enough artifacts that can tap to draw you cards, then at a certain point you just kind of become numb, and because you're playing cards that are overcosted and don't really do much, or don't really generate the value to be worth it. So anything that'll only cost you 1 mana and tap to draw a card, I'll take it, even with the downside that it has. And a lot of the other ones that are 1 mana or less, such as the Atlas and the Temple Bell, those ones are free to tap, but your opponents draw cards as well, so those have a downside. Or the Urza's Blueprints. That one just costs a ton of mana, 6 to cast and then 6 for the Echo to get it out. So, but then thereafter, it doesn't cost anything to tap. So, a lot of these cards have a downside. Revealing 2 cards that share a color, it's possible you don't have it. In a monocolor deck, it should be pretty easy. In a 2-color deck, it should be pretty easy. Assuming that you've got a decent hand to begin with. If you're like top decking, you have like nothing in hand, this card does nothing for you. So that's just more proof that it's important to have a sizable card draw package and not just, a little bit of card draw thrown in. But I'm generally okay with the downside of this, at least in like the deck that I have it in. I would not encourage this as like a regular thing to just throw in all over the place. And just be conscious of the downside to it. Next is Jalum Tome. It's a 3-mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. So this one, it's like 1 mana less than Arcane Encyclopedia to activate, 1 mana more than Endless Atlas to cast. So it feels like it's very similar to this type of effect, but the fact that you draw and discard is a real bummer. Once again, I would not want to discard unless it's like at the end of turn to hand size or something, but having to discard like right away, it also means that if you are top decking for any reason, this just does nothing. If you happen to have Graveyard Madness synergies where you discard synergies, then this could help with that in a not super effective way. Yeah, not great. But if you're going for a full package of these artifact draw things, then you might want to include this as just part of the deal. Next is Jandor's Ring, 6-mana artifact. Pay 2 and tap it. Discard a card you just drew from your library and discard another card to replace it. So this one is rummaging because you're discarding before you draw. There's enough of these that have the discard clause to it before or after or whatever, where I would almost want to just put them all together in a deck and just kind of say to hell with it. I'm just going to keep drawing in, discarding, and not even care. With or without graveyard synergies. But this one is very weak on the power level. It's not seeing a whole lot of play in any, like, at all, and for pretty good reason, because the downside, it's not even that you can just discard a card from your hand. It has to be you have to discard a card that you just drew. So not good. Next is Loreseeker Stone. It's a 6-mana artifact. Pay 3, tap it, draw 3 cards, and it costs 1 more to activate for each card in your hand. So this one does require you to be getting low on cards before, or to just have a ton of mana to do it. But it is a single card that draws you 3. And like how I said before with the Tower of Fortunes, when a single card can draw you multiple ones, that's more valuable than having multiple cards that will draw you one each. This one will help you refill your hand and actually get you back into the game when you need it most. But it is, expensive. 6 mana, 3, and possibly more to activate. Next is Magnifying Glass. This is 3 mana artifact. Tap it to add a colorless, or pay 4, tap it, investigate, which means you create the clue that you pay 2 and sacrifice to draw a card. So as a mana rock, this is just a 3 mana, add a colorless. Okay, that's on par with a lot of cards. Not the best end of the spectrum. As card draw, it's pretty terrible because you have to pay 4 and tap this, which means that you're effectively paying 5 mana just to get the clue token, which you have to then pay 2 and sacrifice to draw a card. Considering how much play this card sees, I don't get it. Maybe it's because it was in a pre-con that people are still keeping it in like a pre-con or a mildly upgraded pre-con, but this should be a card that you take out because it's basically 7 mana to draw a card. The main reason that I think that this one would see play over a lot of the other mana rocks that draw cards are the other mana rocks, like a Mind Stone. You have to sacrifice that mana rock to draw the card, which means that you no longer have the mana that it provides. With this one, you just tap the Magnifying Glass, you create a clue token, and then you sacrifice that to draw a card. So if you're that opposed to sacrificing your mana rocks in exchange for card draw, I can see why this could be appealing for that. But if that's your mind frame, you're probably doing a lot of things wrong. If you have other artifact synergies that will just say, you get extra mana for having extra artifacts, or you get like a doubling season, you get double tokens. If you have anything else that will make this better than what it is on the surface, maybe you can make this card a little bit better. But even for this list, this is definitely on the bad end of the value spectrum. It should see less play than just about everything else on this list, unless you're just playing it as another mana rock, in which case I'm pretty sure there's a lot of mana rocks that are better value than it, just by being 2 mana. Next is Pendant of Prosperity. It's a 3 mana artifact. It enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then Pendant of Prosperity's owner draws a card. Then that player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So if you just do this one at face value, you give it to an opponent, they have control over it. They may choose to draw a card or not. If they do, you get, sure, there's the symmetrical value of them drawing a card and possibly getting a land into play, but they're the one paying 2 mana to do it. You just get it for free at that point. So if they keep doing it, then you just get free value. The main reason that I wanted to point it out here and not, it was also included on the conditional card draw, but the main reason why I wanted to include it here is if you happen to have effects that bring it back under your control, then you can pay 2 mana, tap it, draw 2, get 2 lands into play. And at that point, it's a steal. It's a great, just a fantastic value relative to the other cards on this list. But worst case scenario, you just play it fair and give it to an opponent, and maybe you get value, maybe you don't. Next is Ring of Renewal. It's a 5 mana artifact. You have to pay 5 and tap it, discard a card at random from your hand, and draw 2 cards. So, more rummaging. You have to discard a card to draw 2, so you can dig a little bit deeper, but the card you discard is at random, which is, maybe if you're just trying to do silly things, or if you've got a graveyard-centric deck where anything that goes to your graveyard, like, you're fine with anyway. or maybe just have nothing good in hand. So, discarding the best bad thing is not a problem. This card's not generally going to be super beneficial for you, but 5 mana to draw 2, it's better value than some of the other artifacts on this list. But the downside of having to draw at random is kind of brutal, unless you have no cards in hand. Next is Scroll of Origins. It's a 2 mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card if you have 7 or more cards in hand. So it does have a condition that you have to meet. So you would need a lot of good card draw in your deck already to activate this. But if you do, then it's one of the best values of all of these artifacts to draw you cards. So if you're confident that you can meet that condition, then this one should be like a better version of a lot of the other cards on this list. If you're not confident that you can always meet that condition, then this could just be a dead card that doesn't do anything. But in a lot of games, you will have dead cards. If you're mana screwed, every card that's great in your hand is a dead card. If you're mana flooded, every land you keep drawing is a dead card. If you have just removal and no win cons, or win cons and no, you're often going to have dead cards. So there's always the risk with every card in your deck, and every time you draw in every game, every opening hand, that you're going to end up with cards that just don't do anything. But you can, through deck building, make sure that a card is usually going to do what you intend for it to do. And if you have a deck with a very good amount of card draw, then this one is a reasonable value. Next is Staff of Domination. It's a 3 mana artifact. It has a bunch of abilities. Pay 1 to untap it. Pay 2, tap it, gain 1 life. Pay 3, tap it, untap target creature. Pay 4, tap it, tap target creature. Pay 5, tap it, draw a card. So this one is definitely kind of expensive. It's not a budget card. It sees a good amount of play. It's purely a combo piece. You don't just pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. You could, in which case it's a little bit worse than Jayemdae Tome. You could just pay 5 to tap it, 1 to untap it, 5 to tap it. So basically 6. The first draw would be 5 mana. Every draw thereafter would be 6 mana to just keep drawing cards. So if you have like 15 mana, you could do that a couple of times. For the most part, this is a combo piece. It is intended to go infinite. If you have a way without this to generate infinite mana, this gives you infinite card draw. If you have a creature that can tap for a bunch of mana, then this can untap that creature so that you can generate the infinite mana with this in the creature, then just use the infinite mana to draw cards with this. Very, very powerful card. If it's in play, you probably want to get rid of it. It's definitely one of those immediate targets for removal. Next is Tapestry of the Ages, 4 mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, draw a card. Activate this ability only if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn. So this one does have a clause to it that requires you to play a non-creature spell. If you're playing an artifact deck that, is running this along with the same all the other cards on this list as a package, you're going to have a bunch of non-creature spells. It's a non-creature deck. And so that clause is not going to be too relevant unless you're already in top deck mode and you don't have another non-creature spell. It's basically just 2 mana and draw a card. Next is Thran Tome. It's a 4 mana artifact. Pay 5, tap it, reveal the top 3 cards of your library to target opponent, bury one of those cards of that opponent's choice, and draw the remaining. So you reveal the top 3, your opponent picks the one that he doesn't want you to have, and it goes to your graveyard. The other 2 you get. So it's kind of like Fact or Fiction, except with 3 cards, and you pay 5 and tap this and keep doing it turn after turn. Once again, the cards are all revealed, so your opponents have information about your hands. There's potential political value, like if you're trying to get a board wipe or something, to some sort of answer to one opponent, so you choose a different opponent, and then they should give you, if it's revealed off the top of your library, they should give it to you. But if you're not trying to go that route, it's just draw 3, but they're all revealed. You get the worst 2, and the other one goes to your graveyard. Assuming your opponent knows what's important and what's not, and there's a clear difference. If they make the wrong choice, or if they're all equally good or bad, then you just get 2 out of 3. And if you have graveyard synergies, then you can also make it work there too. But not a terrible value. Yeah, not a whole lot of good to say either, just because it all the cards are revealed. That's a huge downside to me. But if you're just playing for fun, or if you're trying to do more of the make my opponents choose type of effects, all the voting effects, the council's dilemma type stuff. If you're already doing stuff like that anyway, because you just want to be that guy, then here's something that you could include. Next is Tome of Legends. It's a 2-mana artifact. Tome of Legends enters the battlefield with a page counter on it, and whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attacks, put a page counter on it, and pay 1, tap it, remove a page counter, draw a card. So this would, if you have proliferate effects, all you need to do is get this out, cast your commander once, or if he's already out, attack with him once, start proliferating, and then this is just pay 1, tap, and draw a card. That's a pretty good value for pretty much any deck. Pay 1, tap, and draw a card. So if you're playing a proliferate deck, this should be a serious consideration. If you're not, then at the very least, it would have 1 counter on it, assuming you cast your commander after this. So 2 mana and then 1 to activate to draw 1 card. If you're attacking with your commander constantly, you can refill the counters that way and keep paying 1 to tap it and draw a card. This should actually be considered in a lot of decks. If you've got the proliferate, as I mentioned, or if you just have a commander that wants to attack frequently, you can keep getting the counters on this card that way. Yeah, definitely should see more play, I think. Next is Urza's Tome. It's a 2-mana artifact. Pay 3, tap it, draw a card. Then discard a card unless you exile a historic card from your graveyard. Historic cards are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. So if you're playing an artifact or legendary deck, then you might have those cards in your graveyard that you can just exile and not care about. But if you don't, then you have to discard. So draw, discard. You're just looting and getting some card selection, but not really coming out ahead. So not a great card, or at least I'm not a fan of it. If you have graveyard synergies, sure, you can still do whatever with the cards that you end up discarding. But I don't think that this is a terribly great card. So with that is the end of this card draw series. I do intend on making a final video, an 11th video, that will hopefully summarize everything up until this point, so that it can be kind of the Cliff Notes version of it for the people who don't have the patience to sit through 10 very long videos of me describing almost every card possible that draws you cards and is legal in a green deck. But if you happen to stick around for all of this, the long version, then I appreciate it. And thank you. I'll be back with some more videos soon.